Hans Wormhat. Because of the total lunar eclipse last night, I want to do a video on this topic where I just talk about how I know that things are different than what they used to be. And I'm only a little bit over 30 years old, so I haven't been around forever, but even in the amount of time that I've been here, I can tell that things today are drastically different than what they used to be. So I'll just start explaining the way that I know that things are different, and then I'm going to end with some scripture. So the first topic is something that's really obvious if you've ever just paid attention in your life to the sky, and that's the day moon. And people have brought up before the connection between day moon and daemon or demon, and I'm not sure about that, but it does seem like there could be a connection there. The day moon used to be really, really rare, and nobody ever talked about it. It's not something that they would teach you about in school. And do you know why they wouldn't teach you about how you can see the moon sometimes during the day? At least in the past it used to be sometimes. Now it's extremely, extremely, extremely common. But the reason that they wouldn't teach you about the moon during the day is because it disproves NASA's BS lie. The moon gives its own light, just like the King James Bible tells you. And that you can just look, if you look at the moon and you look at the sun and they're in the same sky, you can see that the angles don't match up at all because the moon's giving its own light. And yeah, that one's just really obvious. Now, if the moon is ever above the horizon during the daytime, you will see it because the moon is just so bright. And this is Isaiah prophecy, the moon shall shine like the sun. The sun rules the day. So what's the moon doing out during the day all the time now? Well, it's because the moon is shining like the sun. That prophecy has been fulfilled. That is fulfilled end times prophecy. And yeah, anyone who's been paying attention, they can corroborate what I'm saying. The day moon used to be very rare. I remember seeing the moon during the day sometimes as a child, and it mystified me. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we're not supposed to see the moon during the day. But there it is. But it was a rare event. It wasn't always happening. If the moon was always out during the daytime, I would have known that. I remember it being extremely rare, special. Now it's not special at all. You can always see the moon out during the daytime. It's not rare anymore. And a few more things about the moon that you can just tell, it's just so much brighter than it used to be. I remember I used to have a hard time distinguishing the features of the moon with my eyes. The moon used to kind of look smudgy to me and faint. Now the moon is so bright and you can see all the features with your eyes. And now, even totally asleep people I see, well, so I guess they're waking up a little bit. Even a bunch of people that aren't nearly as awake as they could be, they're realizing, hey, the moon's not that far away. I see comments about that all the time. And these people aren't totally awake, but they're awake enough to see that NASA is lying to you when they tell you how far away these things are. How come when I look at a mountain in the distance, it loses all its features? If you look at a mountain in the distance, it loses its features. It becomes a featureless blob. But how come the moon, I can see all the features. It's crisp. It's a crisp image. And in my opinion, what we're seeing, when we look up at the moon, I don't think that we're looking directly at an image of the moon. I believe that the firmament, the dome around us, I believe that it has optical properties. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing an image of an object that is inside of the firmament. I think the sun is the same way. They look like they're projected images. When you look at the sun, you're not actually looking at the sun. You're looking at an optical property of the firmament. And every single person has their own moon and their own sun. It's just optics. It's all you-centered. And another thing about the moon that we can tell nowadays, it's really obvious nowadays that the moon has cold light. And this is where the seasons come from. The seasons don't come from what NASA tells you. It's just all about this balance of the sun and the moon. It's winter right now where I am, and the sun doesn't go high in the sky. It's barely in the sky. It's not out for very long. But the moon goes really high in the sky, and it's out for a long time. The moon is cold, the sun is hot. It really is that simple. A few more things about the moon. Super blood wolf moons, or just things like that. Supermoons, they never talked about supermoons in the 90s. Nowadays, every single moon they say is a super blood wolf moon, and these things are just way more common than they used to be. That's signs. Those are signs in the sky. All of these things did not used to be so common. Now it's like every single moon they say is a supermoon. It's just because the moon is so much brighter than it used to be. It throws off glare. That's another thing. If you look at the moon, it throws off glare. It did not used to throw off glare. Do you know what throws off glare? The sun. Well, now the moon does too, because the moon is shining like the sun. And now we'll talk about the sun a little bit. One thing that the sun and the moon, so sundogs, do you know what a sundog is? They're actually really common on days where they spray heavy. It's where the sun has this like rainbow circle around it. I remember I started seeing these sometimes in like the mid 2000s when I was going to college. I remember I started seeing these very frequently, and that didn't used to happen all the time in the 90s. And I've even seen moon dogs. The moon is so bright that it'll cause these rings in the sky. And yeah, so just more signs in the sky. The sun itself is way brighter than it used to be. This is where the tranny shills come out and they say, oh, it's a fake sun and a fake moon. It's a sun simulator. No, the sun is just brighter than it used to be. The sun in the 90s was yellow. When you're going to draw the sun, you would pick a yellow crayon. What do kids do these days? Pick a blinding white UV crayon. And if you're a driver, if you've ever been driving, so I've been driving, and so this is just from the 2000s to now, I can tell the sun is brighter. The sun is blinding, the glare that the sun puts up. It's blinding. It's really dangerous to drive sometimes because you're just so blinded by the glare. And that's why you see a lot of chemtrailing in the morning. They chemtrail the morning sun so frequently. It's because the sun is so blinding that they have to. And they also chemtrail the sunsets too, because it's so blinding. Similar to how the moon is obviously colder now than it used to be, the sun is obviously hotter than it used to be. What do you think all this global warming? So it's globe programming, but also it's covering up the fact that the sun is hotter than it used to be. If you just go stand out in the sun now, you feel like you're going to melt within like 5 minutes. It didn't used to be like that. You used to be able to hang out in the sun and it would be fine. Nowadays, you really feel like you need to get out of the sun or you're getting burnt. Now when clouds pass in front of the sun, you can feel an instant temperature drop of like 10 degrees or even more. It didn't used to be such a drastic change. And one more thing about the sun and the moon and how global warming's BS, because it's not just global warming, it's also now every single winter we get crazy storms, crazy ice storms, and it's more extreme in both directions. Our summers are crazy hotter. There's fires all over the place every summer now, but our winters are also more extreme in a lot of ways. And of course they do all sorts of weather manipulation to try to combat this, but I think that it's pretty obvious that our summers are hotter, but our winters are also colder. It's just more extreme in both directions. A few more minor topics about signs in the heavens before I move on to the scripture. Clouds are way different than they used to be. Nowadays you can see all sorts of fake manufactured clouds, and I'm not only talking about the chemtrails, which are really, really obvious. Anybody who doubts chemtrails, they're just a shill tranny. But clouds are way different. Have you guys seen the different levels of clouds? Sometimes you'll see like puffy clouds in the second layer, but then you get this like thin cloud on the first layer, and clouds didn't used to be like this. We used to have puffy clouds that had shapes. Do you remember how people used to lay out and look at clouds and talk about what different shapes they are? Now there aren't shapes. It's just blobs and messy, smeary, it's gross. Or just a silver blanket over your whole sky. We don't have the same skies that we used to have. We used to have dark, dark blue sky, and then these nice, beautiful, white, fluffy clouds with shapes. And now, so that's another thing, our skies aren't as dark blue as they used to be because the sun's brighter. It's definitely not really the focus of this video, but it's worth mentioning stars are brighter in my opinion, than they used to be. They seem brighter and more twinkly. I've heard people talk about this, and I agree. It seems like you can see the stars swaying in the sky more than you used to. If you sit there looking at the stars, sometimes it looks like they're swaying. And this probably has something to do with the waters above. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I agree. I've seen the stars sway now way more than they used to, and they're way twinklier and way brighter than they used to be. I've also seen moving stars, and I still have no explanation for this, but I think that there probably are some verses. I didn't look them up, but I've seen probably about 5 times now where it's just a very, very bright star and it just moves through the sky. I've never seen that before until these past years. And no, it's not a helicopter or an airplane or anything. It's just a star. And I've brought out my binoculars before and looked at it, and it's a star, and it just moves through your sky. It's very strange. And lastly, because it's kind of related, because the sky, the heavens, it's like a clock. Clocks are a Masonic, satanic invention. In heaven, we are not going to have clocks. The heavens were supposed to be our clock, and time moves faster. The moon flies through the sky now. You can sit there and just watch the moon fly through the sky so fast. And I don't think it used to be like that. Oh, and I guess these 2 solar eclipses that are making a giant X marks the spot across the United States of America. That's obviously a huge sign. So I think it was in 2017, the American solar eclipse that started in the state of Oregon, which is the 33rd state, and it went down to the 33rd parallel, going from west to east, and then 7 years later, we're going to have one going from east to west. And listening to NASA try to explain these, how can a solar eclipse go west to east and then 7 years later it's going east to west? It's a bunch of nonsense. It's because none of this NASA fairy tale is true. You live under a dome. You live under the firmament. And all of these objects are inside of the firmament. Yeah, the fact that we all see the same exact side of the moon and it never turns, they'll tell you it's tidal locking. No, that's just a bunch of BS. It's because the moon is probably flat and we're just seeing a projected image of it. Something I haven't heard people talk about before, but I'll just mention it here. If you've ever messed around with a microscope, you can get these crescent-shaped images sometimes when you're messing around with a microscope. So in my opinion, all of this stuff is just optical. It's optics. They're obsessed with optical illusions, and who even figured out those magic eye books? Very strange. Who even figured out that you could do that stuff? So I think that a lot of these things that we see are optics. It's just optical properties of the firmament. So I hope you enjoyed some of those explanations. This is just the observations that I have for how things are different today than what they used to be. And if you want to disagree, whatever, go make your own video about how everything is the same and nothing's changing. But this is not the place to talk about it in my comment section. The trannies are really afraid of these signs in the heavens. My Rex dad, whenever I'm with him and I see the moon in the sky, I'll be like, look. There's the moon, there's the sun, the angles don't match up, and he just doesn't even say, he pretends that he doesn't see it. So the wicked, they're really afraid of these signs. I couldn't be happier. Jesus Christ, please come quickly. The signs are there, and I'm ready, and you should be too. I'm going to read a few verses from the book of Joel. Joel chapter 2, starting at verse 28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, your young man shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Well, we just had a huge eclipse, and there's more eclipses coming, and we've been having blood moons left and right, so here we are. Here's the Isaiah prophecy that I always talk about, Isaiah chapter 30, verse 26. Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people, and healeth the stroke of their wound. This is Revelation, book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 12. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. So I don't know that the sixth seal has been opened yet. I think that the great earthquake could be, you know how they're always talking about, oh, we're waiting for the next big one. I think that could just be talking about this. And who knows, maybe when that happens, that's when they're going to roll out all the alien stuff. Oh, the aliens are blocking the sun from us, and they're blocking the moon from us, and when the stars start to fall. You know how they always talk, oh, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's probably talking about this, and they'll probably blame it on aliens, and people will believe it. Here's more scripture talking about that. This is the book of Matthew, chapter 24, starting at verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So I think this is talking about rapture, and probably right as rapture happenings, there's going to be a huge trumpet. All of these things, the sun will probably darken, and the moon will probably darken, and the heavens are going to open up like a scroll. So all this stuff, and like I said, they'll probably blame it on some sort of alien invasion, and that's when the NWO really is going to usher in, oh, we need a one world government to fight these alien people. And I'm not going to read it because you can read it, but the next chapter in Matthew, in the book of Matthew, chapter 25, gives the parable of the 10 virgins. And so you need to make sure that your lamp is full of oil, that you have backup oil. All right, God bless everybody.